Hello, sweethearts. Today on Stories for Kids, I'm telling the story of Sleeping Beauty. Once upon a time, long ago, a king and queen wished that they had a child, but they just couldn't have any. One day, as the queen was bathing in a spring and dreaming of a child, a frog crept out of the water and called to her. "Your wish shall be fulfilled," said the frog. "Before a year has passed, you shall bring a daughter into the world." And before a year had passed, the queen had a baby girl named Rose. The child was so beautiful and sweet that the king could not contain himself for joy. He held a feast and invited the entire kingdom to come celebrate the arrival of the princess. He invited the fairies too, so that they could bestow gifts upon the child. There were 13 of them in his kingdom, but the king only invited 12 of the fairies. The 13th fairy was known to be cruel and spiteful. At the castle, an amazing feast was held and gifts were given. One fairy gave her virtue, another beauty, a third riches, and so on, with everything in the world that anyone could wish for. After 11 of the fairies had presented their gifts, the 13th fairy suddenly appeared. She was angry and she wanted to get payback for not being invited to the feast. She called out in a loud voice, "When she's 15 years old, the princess shall prick herself with the spindle and fall down dead." Then, without another word, the 13th fairy turned and left the hall. The guests were absolutely horrified, but the 12th fairy, whose wish was still not spoken, quietly stepped forward. Now, her magic could not remove the curse, but she could soften it. So she said, "Your daughter shall not die, but instead she shall fall into a deep sleep that will last 100 years. Over the years, the promises of the fairy came true, one by one. Princess Rose grew to be beautiful, modest, kind, and clever. Everyone who saw her could not help but love her. The king and queen were determined to prevent the curse placed on her by the spiteful fairy. They sent out a command that all spindles in the whole kingdom should be destroyed. In the morning of her 15th birthday, Princess Rose awoke early. She was excited to be another year older. She was up so early in the morning, in fact, that she roamed freely through the halls, keeping herself occupied. She felt a strange urge to explore an empty tower she'd never been in. She climbed the narrow, winding staircase and reached a little door. A rusted key was sticking out of the lock, and when she turned it, the door creaked open. In a little room, she found an old woman with a spindle, busily spinning her flax. The old woman was so deaf that she never heard the king's command that all spindles should be destroyed. "Good morning, Granny," said Rose. "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm spinning," said the old woman. "What is the thing that twirls round so merrily?" asked Princess Rose. As she took the spindle and tried to spin it too, but she had scarcely touched the spindle when it pricked her finger, and at that moment she fell upon the bed which was standing nearby and lay still in a deep sleep. The king and queen and the servants had all started their morning routines, and right in the midst of their routines they fell asleep too. The horses fell asleep in the stable. The dogs fell asleep in the yard. The doves on the roof fell asleep, as did the flies on the wall. Even the fire in the hearth grew still and went to sleep. The kitchen maid, who sat with the chicken before her ready to pluck its feathers, fell asleep. The cook, scolding the kitchen boy for the mess that he made, fell fast asleep. The wind died down, and the trees in front of the castle Not a leaf stirred. Around the castle a hedge of briar roses began to grow, and every year it grew higher, till at last nothing could be seen of the sleeping castle. From time to time, princes would come and try to force their way through the hedge into the castle, but they found it impossible, for the thorns, as though they were alive, grabbed at the princes and would not let them through. After many years, a prince came again to the country and heard an old man tell the tale of the castle which stood behind the briar hedge, and the beautiful princess who slept within for 100 years. The prince said, "I am not afraid. I must go and see this sleeping beauty." The good old man did all in his power to persuade him not to go, but the prince would not listen. When the prince approached the briar hedge, he found it covered with beautiful large roses. The shrubs made way for him of their own accord and let him pass unharmed. In the courtyard, the prince saw the horses and the dogs lying asleep. On the roof sat sleeping doves with their heads tucked under their wings. When he went into the house, the flies were asleep on the walls, and the servants asleep in the halls. Near the throne lay the king and queen, sleeping peacefully beside each other. In the kitchen, the cook, the kitchen boy, and the kitchen maid all slept with their heads resting on the table. The prince went on through the castle, and at last he reached the last tower. He opened the door to the little room where the Princess Rose lay sleeping. There she lay, looking so beautiful that he could not take his eyes off her. He bent down, gave her a kiss, and as soon as his lips touched hers, the princess opened her eyes and smiled at him. Throughout the castle, everyone and everything woke up and looked at each other with astonished eyes. Within the month, the prince and Princess Rose were married, and they lived happily together all of their lives. And that is the story of Sleeping Beauty. Thanks for listening, sweethearts. That's it for Stories for Kids. Come back next week for my next story. Bye-bye.